All right, y'all want to go ahead and get started? Yeah, it's being recorded. So for all those folks that are jumping on late. I am delighted actually to open this session. So crucial, but never easy, building team science and emergency medicine clinical research, sponsored by the research committee. We have esteemed guests, Catherine Staton, Joseph Miller, Zhao Vasashi, I hope I pronounced that correctly, and Caroline Farmuth. I am going to let them introduce themselves. If you don't mind, please put any questions that you have in the chat, and I will try to monitor that as we go. And then at the end, we can open the mics up, given the number of people we have here, for folks to just ask questions and have dialogue. So without further ado, Joe, are you first, or who is first?
Yeah, I can start. Thank you, David. And thanks everyone for attending, especially those on the East Coast where I know it's time for happy hour, but we want to do quick intros. So I'm Joseph Miller. I'm a researcher at Henry Ford Hospital in Wayne State, and happy to talk with you all about how we can build great team science for emergency medicine. And I'll pass it on to Catherine.
Hi, I'm Catherine Staton. I'm an associate professor of emergency medicine at Duke, and I have an affiliation in the Global Health Institute. Do most of my work in Tanzania and some in Brazil. I'll pass it on to Dr. Farmuth.
Caroline Farmuth. I'm an associate professor of emergency medicine at the University of Cincinnati and have worked with all the other panel members at some point on various projects.
Dr. Vasashi.
Yeah, my name is Vasashi. I'm an assistant professor here at Duke University in the emergency medicine and global health as well.
Awesome, thanks. All right, well, I'm going to share my screen, and I'll point out too, again, feel free to use the chat box for questions, and we'll try to answer as we go on. It's a relatively small group, so feel free to ask, give your input, and we can pause through this. We're really just going to go through a bunch of scenarios that are fairly real life. Well, they're definitely real life. The actual identification of some of the participants in these scenarios may have been hidden, although I don't see any of them on the call, but or on the other webinar, but maybe they'll tune in later. So anyway, I hope it's stuff that you all can can learn from, and I know I'm going to learn from Catherine, Joelle, and Caroline, and that hopefully you also can give input as we go, because I think this is all great stuff. So I'm going to share a screen real quick here, and we'll get started through some scenarios. And we went through that already. Relevant to this particular talk, none of us have any conflicts of interest. And again, we're going to both outline some principles of team science, but we're really going to do this through these scenarios that'll highlight pitfalls, both in terms of doing clinical research and working with teams and emergency care, and in terms of applying for grants. I think, I know many of you on this session, and I know that you are in research teams and probably struggle with some of the same things we do. So hopefully we can all learn from each other. So with that, I'm going to start with the first scenario. So Aaron joined your faculty as an excited budding physician scientist. Your chair actually gave Aaron 25% protective time for the first 3 years, so pretty generous. Now it's nearing the end of the 3 years already. Time flew by. He's contributed to several publications and grants you are working on. Let's say that you were more of kind of a late early career, mid-career researcher. He sends you an email, though, that he's pursuing a community EM position outside your institution. So I'm going to throw some questions at our panel here. So for the panel, what do you all think is going on, and how do you ensure that new research faculty feel like they're valued and have a voice in your research group?
So I'll take the first shot, I guess. It's funny because Joe said that this, is real life. And when I first read that, I was like, oh, did he write this about me? Not that I'm leaving for a community job, people I work with, but I moved institutions just over 3 years ago, and I got the same exact deal, right? I got, protected time to really try to build research in the meantime. I've written a lot of grants, only a few of them have hit. And, it is frustrating where you constantly are, as soon as I get funded, I got to write that next grant because what happens when that runs out? And so I think one of the wonderful things that, people at my institution have done is really made sure that I was building collaborations along the way. So my chair was constantly checking in with me and my research mentor was constantly checking in with me. And I by no means have fully funded myself at the end of my 3 years, but I am fully funded as a researcher through some of my own and some collaborations. And so I think, they didn't just give me that time and say like, okay, we've given you that time, now you figure it out and be good in 3 years. But they were actively trying to help me manage what I was going to do with that time along the way.
Yeah, I want to add that every person needs a team, and the team can be team science and based of project related team. It can be grant related team. It can be department related team, but no one is going to succeed on their own in any way. You need your boss. You need the people and your peers that are working with you. You need everybody to be on the same path and understand what's happening and how this support is going to go, what it's going to look like. And without those people next to you, it feels like a very lonely 3 years with 25% buy down of you literally climbing the wall on your own and your fingernails. So success really depends upon those partnerships and those teams you create to be able to give yourself options sort of at the end of your initial buy down.
I think one other thing I wanted to kind of point out too in this scenario is that I find that both in my own group, maybe in, really in my own experience too, that some of the satisfaction of going from, first year faculty to like 3 or 4 years where maybe you're thinking about a K award or just, or just making progress, if you're only working on your mentors projects and not really, and your team isn't really developing your own ideas and your own things that you want to do, that potentially can create a lot of dissatisfaction. So being aware, it's easy, or at least it's easy for me if I have like a new PhD or a new, junior faculty, I'm like, oh, you should come help me with this project. But the reality is it's probably more important that I help them develop their own projects and not just use them to get my own stuff done. Do you all have, within your teams, do you have specific tracks for career development around methodology or other learning opportunities for new faculty?
Great question. So we are actually in the throes of developing mandatory, highly suggested mentorship teams that are formalized mentorship teams that will include discussions of what capacity building is needed in the area of research and grant writing or those kind of things, but also things outside of emergency medicine to the broader institution and or other schools if that's needed, or institutions to be able to bring in other support. So as a smaller division of a larger institution, there's so much out there that we can really learn from that we haven't really touched base on. So part of that is being developed through our faculty development initiatives within Duke, but it's still really in the early stages, but a lot of the support can be there for that.
Cool.
Yeah, I think that we've been trying this with a couple of different ways. In our department here, first they gave me an opportunity to work in the department, which is kind of unique. I'm a PhD, I'm not a MD, I'm not a physician scientist, and my track is all in methodology training. But I'm also not a biostatistician in the sense that I do the biostats work for the clinicians. I have my own research agenda within the department, and I collaborate with the physician scientists or the clinical faculty to help leverage their work around the spaces that I'm interested in. And that's been for me, it's a very unique opportunity to do the kind of work that I'm interested in doing with interesting clinical questions that I would not be able to think about myself.
Great. Let's jump into another scenario here. That'll bring out some more points. Okay.
So on the second scenario, so you've developed an acute stroke grant with a device company you've had a relationship with. Although stroke research is not really your main area of interest, I mean, you can do this. You feel confident in doing the research, and the company has a $1.2 million contract for you to proceed. A colleague in your department who has a long background of stroke expertise, however, attacks you at the next faculty meeting when he learns that the grant is funded without his input. Any thoughts?
I mean, I think some of this gets back right to the feeling that academic research can sometimes be cutthroat, right? People are like, I have to support my own self. And so, you know, rather than seek out collaborators, people view them as competition. And so I think that, you know, you really need to cultivate that, you know, we are a collaborative environment. There is room for everyone to succeed. And in fact, like the more you help each other, the more you will succeed, because then, you know, they'll come back and collaborate with you later. And so, you know, I think that it's detrimental to you if you don't take advantage of the expertise that is available to you. You know, and there's a way to pitch this to, you know, the faculty expert in your group and say, you know, I've been approached by the, you know, regarding this project, and I'd really like to, you know, run this, but, you know, would like your input without just completely, you know, handing it over.
Yeah, and so this is definitely a real scenario that happened. And you know, the other thing that I observed from seeing this from afar was that, you know, the relationship between these two investigators, you know, was stale for 5 years after this happened, probably still is. And so, you know, their future ability to collaborate together was completely ruined. So even though this one faculty may have, you know, gotten the credit within the institution for bringing in this money for a particular project, in the end, it kind of ruined at a department level some relationships that could have blossomed or done a lot more work together. I think the other component is, you know, just having a process within a department where ideas are shared more, you know, openly, and again, like you said, the competitive nature of some of us can make that difficult, but having a process or a standardized process for sharing ideas early on could have potentially prevented this kind of an issue.
And to add what Joe was saying, I think it also revolves on the culture that's developed within the department. If it's a very performance-driven culture and then competition-driven culture, that sometimes goes against the collaborative nature of research. So I think that it's very important to think about the research plan in a way that it fosters collaboration and gives prizes for collaboration instead of just personal outputs, because then that, as a department, it's harder to reach these goals. I can see this situation happen with, at least with me at the same time, and that's a relationship that never was rebuilt. Because then it's a working relationship that is hard to build trust again, and this is really complicated in a collaboration scenario.
Point. So far, just to summarize what we have so far for this one, it's really aligning our goals and making sure that people know of the other goals in the department. Creating an open culture where it's a collaborative culture, not a competitive culture, and therefore probably understanding sort of what's underlying that competition, whether it's funding or grants or prestige or whatever, as well as relationship building. So the relationship between the two of these people have now been possibly irreparably damaged, never mind sort of the culture of the environment. Just wanted to open it up to see if there are any thoughts from the participants. You can either put them in the text or mention them here, it's up to you.
Yeah, I'll say, you know, it just seemed like they were not collaborating very well. or not collaborating, communicating well, right? So someone's got this great opportunity, they jump at it, and they did not intentionally want to hurt the other person's feelings, but they grabbed the opportunity before discussing it with the other person, and then the other person felt slighted that you didn't even have the decency to communicate this opportunity, and it's my area of expertise, in fact. So, if you had just collaborate, if you at least communicated with me, I would have been a little more understanding. But the fact that you just went ahead with this without communicating it means that you really don't want to collaborate with me, and that, why should I even why should I deal with you in the future? So you got to be, I think, just not communicating is a problem that we sometimes face.
I think part of the way to remind that is to remind that, right? Remind all faculty members. But if there's a culture of support and growing each other, then it turns into a lot more of a collaborative process, I think. And so at least one way to think about improving that communication could be through mentorship programs and collaborative mentoring, et cetera, with different faculty and the team in general.
I will remark too, during COVID and the rush of trials and everything, this became like an institutional problem at our place where departments were competing for funds and not talking to one another and enrolling, talking to sponsors on the exact same study or extremely, related studies. And so, then, our VP of research had to create this process where everything kind of went through her and a small team to vet this stuff and make sure communication was happening.
Agreed. Same too. Excellent.
Great. Let's run over to the next scenario.
Okay, and this is a very interesting scenario. So you are a new faculty in a growing department of emergency medicine. Your health system values research funding highly, so you're competitive to get those large NIH grants. And there are several faculty in your department doing independent industry trials in unrelated areas. You're frustrated because you don't see any unified vision for the department outside of individual efforts. And so this scenario is, I think, is highly common for departments that are just trying to grow into research, and it's very natural for research to grow through in the industry trials in the emergency setting. And as it starts to grow, you start getting confusions about the directions and everything. So for the panel, that's great that I'm asking you guys, because I'm not leading with this kind of trials myself, but I can understand the issues. How did you go through this process in our department? Do you face this challenge? And if you face this challenge, how did the department deal with this challenge in trying to find this unified vision? And then I'll just add to that, what is the role of having collaboration and teams build out to build this vision?
It's a great question. So very common for this to happen. And I start laughing because I'm sort of like, yeah, been there, done that, right? So it's how you start a lot of times is you start with individuals, and then individuals keep growing, and then next thing you know, you have silos, right? Because you've learned to grow as an individual. We went through medical school and residency as an individual. Breaking that mold requires literally going back to kindergarten and going back to the beginning and saying, I love this. What do you love? Wait, I love working together. And it seems like the most basic of things, but it actually forces us to stop what we're doing, to take a really good look at what we're doing, what we're really good at, how we can work together to do that. And so in many situations, that hasn't been done. And I think it really just takes like a lot of introspection. The leadership of the group, of the team within emergency medicine need to introspectively look at, what are we really good at? Can we look at opioid use if we have no people presenting for opioid overdoses? Like, okay, that's probably not the best idea. And really taking a look at your best things that you have, what you do the best, who your personnel are that can really succeed, and then creating an overall vision. And the pillars are that support that vision, and then moving forward in that direction as a team. Because I think once you understand who's sitting at your table and who your partners are, then you can grow together and no longer be independent.
Yeah, I think mean, and hopefully this doesn't happen at any of your institutions, but I think another factor that I felt has helped foster this is also thinking about how the money flows and try not to silo the money. So if you can combine your resources, combine the flow of funds, and have more of a centralized process for that, I think it does naturally break down some of the silos and force people to have more of a unified vision for the at a department.
So I'll say from a chair's level that two points. One is if you can align your research with your institution's priorities and goals. For example, Emory has 5 areas that it says it's going to be expert in, and one of those is cancer, one of those is cardiovascular disease, one of those is brain health. So if you can align your research with that, you'll end up being more successful because they're going to recruit experts in those areas around the university that are people who you can build your team with. The other point is that emergency medicine is perfect at this, right? We're team builders to begin with. We communicate with everybody in the system because we have to. That's how we take care of our patients. So, and we're relatively, despite the fact being 30 years old, we're still a relative, or more than that now, young scientifically as an organization. So it's okay to have collaborators outside of emergency medicine. In fact, it's pretty much mandatory for you to get a lot of really good work done and to build legitimacy. And then the last thing I'll say with respect to this particular scenario is that this is the job of a research strategy within your department. So I don't know whether you have a vice chair of research, your chair, or whoever you're working with, but getting your research team together, people who are interested in research, because that's not going to be very many people within a clinical department like emergency medicine. And those folks will, getting them together and developing a strategy of how you're going to work together and leverage each other's talents is pretty much mandatory if you're going to grow a good research program.
We are actively looking for a vice chair of research if anybody would like to come work for us.
Nice plug.
I think one of the things is, right, there's a fine line to walk because you don't want to quash people's dreams, right? Like you don't want to say like, no, you absolutely can't work on this line of research if that's what somebody's really interested in. But can they move a little bit to one side to kind of fit better into it? I started research looking a lot at pain management. So I was really interested in pain and palliative care as a resident. And then when I became an attending, I started going down kind of that pain route. And then that led me to, patients who come to the emergency department frequently, which led me into like mental health and opioid use disorder. And now I've kind of like fallen squarely into this opioid use disorder realm. But I flip back and forth a lot where depending on what the grant is I'm writing, sometimes I emphasize the like, we really got to, worry about the harms of opioids. And then sometimes I flip back to this other side and I'm like, we've gone so far, like, what about the untreated pain? And so it's nice because I can kind of, go back and forth on that line and have collaborators on either side.
I think it puts it in the different perspectives. Maybe another way to see this is from a faculty perspective, not from the chair as we listen, but if you're a faculty facing this situation, how do you go about maybe generating this conversation, or how you do go about engaging your colleagues to build something closer to this, or how do you navigate this situation?
That's a good question, Joao.
That's a great question.
Yeah. No, I think if, it's really not easy, but, hopefully if you have a chair or vice chair of research that is open to, trying to develop this and pushing other faculty members to build a common vision, that's one way to go. Now, if you are that vice chair of research and have to do that, that's a little harder. I don't know. What do you think, Catherine?
I'm just going to advocate for a little bit outside of the vice chair of research. I'm going to advocate for all research, like research to be all leaders. And the reasoning is all of our faculty need to be developed. So faculty development is a huge area that the platform of research needs to support as well. It's not just faculty development though. It impacts your clinical care. If you have too much sort of money going in the direction of your research infrastructure, you don't have the support, it does impact sort of your overall fiscal responsibility within the department. So I think all leadership should be at the table to build this vision, because it talks about who your hiring practices are, what your career development is, what your platform for them to work is going to be, what your priorities are funding wise, et cetera. So I think it's a leadership question. Now, when it comes down to the faculty member themselves, I think you have to advocate for career development and mentorship, because I almost think that if they don't have the vision where you want to go, maybe this wasn't the right place, or give me someone who can help me get to where I want to go, or see the vision that you're seeing. I think it's very common, especially when you're just coming out, that like, yeah, I'm just working clinically. But as you start to build your direction, you want to see where you can go and you see what's happening. And without an understanding of what that vision is, it's really hard to do that. And you can't always do that from the position that you have as a faculty member. You almost need to get that buy-in from leadership, vice chair or chair level, to be able to help you build your thought process and where to go.
Yeah, and I think that one thing that I've also seen from the faculty level, when you're just doing your research in your daily basis and you just want to start building this up, is collaborate, find people to work really close in your space. And as you build a stronger line working with 2-3 different faculty, and that can help trigger the need to discuss that you're maybe unbalancing how the research program is going in the department. So I think that on a daily basis, do the work, collaboratively build your team, and then these other pieces that are higher level planning are also important.
Awesome. Let's move on to the next scenario. I think, Caroline, you have this one.
Yeah. So when funding came in for an exciting study on opioid use disorder, you rushed to hire a coordinator referred to you from a clinical colleague. 4 months later, you realize that issues with poor organization and communication are putting your funding at risk. So I think most people have figured out, that your team really can make or break you, right? Like you cannot do all of the work on your own. And so you have to have a team that you can trust. You have to have a team that can do stuff, without asking you, 25 trillion questions every minute, so that your research can go on while you're working your clinical shifts and those kind of things. And so questions for the group, are, how do you evaluate, qualities of research team members that might not be, detectable on their application or their CV? How do you figure out who's good with time efficiency and who's good, who's a people person? How many of your team members do you involve in the hiring process? Do you have them meet everyone on your research team? How much of a say does each person get, when you're thinking about bringing somebody on? And then, what do you do with these, requests from people? So, you get this all the time, right? You've got a collaborator who's like, I have this awesome, research associate and I'm about to lose, funding for them. And I really need to get them a great spot. So what do you do with those and how do you handle, kind of special requests like that?
I like what David put in: hire hard, manage easy. Yeah, I've learned the hard way myself. I remember it wasn't exactly like this scenario, but maybe the first grant I had, my first coordinator was amazing, and then I went to hire a second person on top of that, and one of the deans at the local medical school had contacted me and said she had this person that she would really love if we gave an opportunity to. And without I kind of made the unilateral decision of, oh, sure, yeah, let's bring this person on. Of course, there was a brief interview, but it wasn't nearly the vetting that should have been done. And so sure enough, this person ended up, costing me far more time and money than it was ever worth. So I think, one thing that we've done, we've created a very kind of standardized process for hiring. That's almost like a residency process where we have multiple, where we have a couple manager, coordinator manager, and then 2 to 3 faculty, interview each candidate, really vet them hard in terms of, checking prior references, et cetera.
I'll add some complexity to the issue. So most of my hiring team is in Tanzania. So add language and culture to that issue. This is why I think it's relational. So most of the team that works with our group, the team hires each other. And the reasoning is because they've all know each other. They all live in Tanzania. They know each other. They talk to each other. They know who's done really well in their past 3 or 4 jobs. And so empowering the team to be able to make sure that they have an equal, balanced, hardworking group, I think for me has been really important. And then even within our sort of local team, we allow for trial periods or fellowships with us or volunteer time, as they call it in Tanzania as well. Come work with us for a year and we'll pay you if we can. But then after that, once we know that you're really good, then we'll hire you, which is a little bit less possible in other settings, but it shows you the hard work and the dedication. I just had a phone call today with a researcher from Canada who physically called me about one of my master's students, and he had a 10-minute discussion and he said, that's all I need to know, which he said was important, but it's that personal connection of somebody's experience of their hard work, I think comes through. If you're able to describe a lot of the background and personality traits and and examples of what's worked well.
Any thoughts from the audience on this topic?
Yeah, sure. I'll just say that I've hired the wrong person before, and you just got to make the quick decision to allow them to go into another area where they'll be better suited. And that's the way I look at it. Like, it's not that there's better opportunities out there for them. And I try to actually, for this particular person that wasn't working out, I found someone that they probably matched pretty well with, and they actually are doing quite well in a different lab setting, but they were not the right person for my particular lab. So I think that's another way to look at it too, is when you do have to cut, to try to make it a win for them. It's not so much that they failed, is that they probably would do better in a different setting.
I think that's a great point. And along those same lines, I mean, the question is, 4 months later, when you realize this, how do you tease out, is it because you poorly trained the person? Is it because you haven't given them the tools they need to do their job? Or is it because, like, truly this person is just not going to work out? So how do you make that decision? And then how do you decide, when you're going to remediate someone and when you're going to send them on? And if you are going to send them on, how do you make sure that you're not just, passing on, a lame team member to another team?
Yeah, that's a good question, Karen. I think, like Willer mentioned, there's some people that you can eventually tell, and not like necessarily within a couple of months, but maybe within 4 or 5 months, you can tell that it's just the fit's not there. Like, they have the capacity, but they don't have the fit. And so I find that those people are great if you can, like, find a fit within your institution or some other opportunity for them. We had someone that he thought he was going to be eventually go into clinical medicine, and was he thought he would love, like, interacting with patients, but he just realized he didn't like interacting with patients, and that it took him 4 or 5 months to figure that out. And so we helped direct him to a lab position, and he's done great there. Now, if they lack, like, other key skills, then it might be a little tougher to versus remediating them versus finding a different position.
I think from what Dr. Sharp was saying, I just want to echo that. I think finding what the person wants and where they are is key. Because I think it's probably just a mismatch. And it might be the tools, it might be the knowledge, it might be something. And it might be intrinsic that this person knows that this isn't right. So sort of a reset and going back from the very beginning and being like, so how do you think this is going? What do you feel about this?
Yeah. Actually, we just lost one of my best coordinators. He'd been with us for 4 or 5 years, was awesome. And he finally decided like it just wasn't the fit and he's going to the FBI. So I can't complain with him.
And in the case that I brought up, the person actually got passed on to me from another lab because the person was shutting their lab down and said, this person is really wonderful. You know, they need a position and, you know, they seem to have the skill set that I wanted, but it became obvious that they did not have the breadth of skills that I needed for my lab because I'm a small lab. And this person had very good, you know, cell biology skills. And so there was a larger lab that was looking for someone and that she actually was a better fit for this large multidisciplinary lab that had, you know, tons of funding and she had a niche in that lab and she's done wonderful. But for my small lab, I need someone who had more of a breadth of skills and it was just not a great fit. So it was a win for her. It was a win for me that we were able to get her into the right place.
So Catherine and Zhao, a question more aimed at you all. You know, I know that all of us now have been like slogging through Zoom for, you know, the past year and something changed with COVID, but I mean, you all do this on a regular basis, right? I mean, like Zhao, you're doing research down in Brazil from Durham, North Carolina, and Catherine, you're flying back and forth between Africa and, you know, your teammates are constantly, you know, not connected to you and you can't just stop by their office and be like, hey man, what's going on? So, you know, how do you create those personal connections with your team so that you can kind of sort out, you know, like somebody put in the chat, you know, like, is this like an issue because they've got something going on in their life, or is this like just like a work issue?
Yeah, that's a great question. One, I very commonly just have like, how's life conversations over Zoom. And almost all the time we mandate photos on because like, I don't care what you're doing. I have my kids or my dog on my lap a lot of times as well, because like life happens as we're doing all of this. So we make a very close personal relationship the best we can with our students, with our workers, with everybody. We are constantly WhatsApping our team through group texts and understanding what's happening. As the new president came in Tanzania, we all mourned the old one and celebrated the new one together globally, right? So there's so much that you just take part in that team as a constant 24-hour investment in your team. But then you also have to think about wellness for yourself as well as your team. So we host a monthly social hour, which while it gets so frustrating, if I'm like just needing 20 more minutes to finish something, I just shut everything down and go and play a game. And you get to like learn more about your team and you joke and you like do what you would normally do in the office and like be a human being. And it breaks down a lot of those barriers so that people feel more comfortable talking to you and calling me Catherine and telling me if they need something so that you can really support the team in whatever they need. Every time I go to Tanzania, I take them out to dinner, which is like a huge respectful thing within the culture, to be able to have them have the same kind of conversations and let me see their homes and their families, and they come see us and they all know my children. And it's just that relationship building allows a lot of the HR management to be just much easier.
Yeah, I think that these softwares are very helpful. So like Catherine said, WhatsApp is vastly used and it's where we live with the group. It's kind of, instead of coming to my door, knocking and asking, they just WhatsApp me any time of the day and any time of, and you just answer whenever you can, but it's a standing conversation that never ends within the group. And sometimes the group's a little bit more social than others, and they use that to also share memes and GIFs and all of that, which kind of brings a different layer of interaction. But we also use Teams a lot because that's a Microsoft software that we use through Duke. And then although we have all the working spaces, we have a couple of channels for just sharing personal news, sharing information about important things that are happening that we want to be able to talk about. So you kind of bring the real life physical experience to the virtual space. And honestly, to work with our colleagues globally during this time of pandemic, besides everything, it hasn't changed. It just kept going with everything that changed in everybody's life personally, but the work relationship kept the same.
It's really cool. All right, well, why don't we finish up with one more scenario and then probably wrap things up after that. So this one is, you've committed to be one of 3 sites for an NIH-funded study on palliative care, a topic you're extremely passionate about. 9 months into the project, you're falling far short of your enrollment goals, and you had promised to publish a methods paper with the team, but you haven't got it done. You realize that 2 unfunded resident projects have pulled you away from your main funded project. So for the panel, or anyone really, what kind of things do you do to make sure that your team stays on focus, or any best practices that really help you keep focused on your vision or mission?
So as a big fan of being very OCD and full of lists and checkboxes, we also have a spreadsheet that we use as a team. And the team can all access the spreadsheet. It's the same exact thing. The things on priority are listed at the top. The things with less priority are a little bit further down. And I think that there needs to be so much conversation. It's almost like a group think, that everybody knows what the priorities are. It would be the first thing. The second thing is alignment. If there is a project way out in left field, it's just not going to get the team's attention. So I try to align all of the resident, medical student, undergraduate student, graduate student projects within the group sphere, so that if one is moving forward, they're all moving forward, to be able to keep that from happening. Not that it doesn't happen, but less less frequently.
So what do you all do when you're good friends with your resident program director, and he's like, my residents need this project done. Why aren't, don't you have time to help them out? How do you deal with that? Caroline, I know you deal with some resident projects.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, I'm the residency research director, right? And this is our constant challenge. Like we have lots of residents that are interested in stuff. They need a lot of, supervision and mentorship and all of those things. And I just have to keep going back to our department leadership and saying, like, I need X resource, and like, then it gets filled for a little while, and then inevitably, like, another thing falls apart, and then you have to go say, well, I need X now. And I think really, echoing what Catherine said, it's setting realistic expectations up front. Like, this is a realistic project you can do. The thing that you have just presented to me is not a realistic project. And sometimes it's getting, them connected with other people. Like I know actually like David Wright is working with some of our residents right now, because they're interested in like TBI and brain stuff. And, I don't know anything about that. And so, they've found their own mentors outside, but I think knowing when to delegate and knowing when, okay, like this is too far outside of my expertise, or, there's another person that would be much better suited for this. But also knowing, enough about the other faculty that you're not, sending somebody somewhere where it's going to be a dead end and then you're going to end up doing like way more work on the back end. But I think like being upfront and saying, like, yes, I may be able to help you with this, but instead of, you think it's only going to take 2 months to do this quick retrospective review, it's actually going to take, 12 months because like you have to build the REDCap database and you have to get it through the IRB and you have to do this. And I cannot like, have a 24-hour turnaround every time you send me something, it's more like a week or two before I'm going to give you feedback.
Yeah, I was gonna add, but first I just want to ask Catherine if she's putting this for me to read because it's very common. But I'm also going to add that when you're working with large groups, you have students, residents, faculty, and everybody, there's a lot to manage, especially if you're the PI, you're the mentor, the advisor. And then I also feel like in this group, if you don't have a communication structure to keep things flowing, then the one that barks louder gets it, right? Does that translate well? Sorry. Yes, good. Okay. So then, I mean, for me, the students that are emailing me every day asking for updates are the ones that I'm going to reply because I want their email to stop. And so I think that when you build a relationship where you have regular meetings where everybody has space to discuss their projects, you establish check-ins, you establish relationships with students that are on different levels, like our postdocs work with our students to give them more attention than what we can do. I think you start building these layers and putting some structures in place allows you to kind of give them more attention and get things trying to flow based on the prioritization that you can give. So it's better than just getting everybody to email what you want to do and have your email as a to-do list, because that becomes a nightmare.
And I'm not an expert at this by any means, but I feel like for particularly like medical students and residents, and we all the, MDs kind of live through this, like, there are some months when you are very available and some months when you are in a clinical, what I call black hole, and you just work and eat and sleep and try to bathe. And like, that's all you do that month. And so when they have like that easier month, right? Or if they do like a research month, I think trying to prepare them, like get them to the point that like if their research month, let's say is January, a couple months before that, like make sure they have done the things they need to do to make the most out of that month. Like don't start January 1st, which it's not going to be. So January 2nd or 3rd, by the time they like take their few months to relax, their few days to relax, but like start that conversation a few months ahead of time. And I think the same thing for the medical students, right? Like try to like make sure they've done X, Y, and Z so they can maximize that couple weeks that they have with you. So that kind of prep work is out of the way. I think that really helps. And there was a resident, I did the same thing. I was like, well, you've got this research month, and, month X. So I started kind of bugging her 3 months ahead of time. So hopefully she was able to get some stuff done and be as efficient as possible during her actual research month.
Awesome. Thanks, Karen.
Most definitely. I just want to add, we all have crazy, ridiculous schedules, but they're very unlikely that it's all at the same time. So having a varied and group research team actually allows one of the senior mentors to be there, hopefully, to be able to keep the process going. So I think that that's always been really helpful.
Yeah. Well, we're actually running toward the end of our time here, believe it or not. So I think we covered a lot of these key things about building relationships, having frequent, open, direct communication, shared vision, choosing team members judiciously, and really focusing on your vision. And there's our contact info if anyone wants to reach out to us. But special thanks to all of you for joining us today, and hope some of this was helpful and that you can all build amazing research teams that are going to change emergency care. And thank you, David, for moderating as well. Appreciate the help. And thank you to Catherine, Caroline, and Joao for preparing this. And I wish you all the best for the rest of SAM.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Everyone.